My name is Tamara Turki, and I'm a Palestinian. And I come from a family of Palestinian refugees. My father's family fled to Lebanon in the 1940s on refugee travel documents. It wasn't until he was 12 that my father was given the Austrian citizenship. And because of that, here stands a perfect image of a privileged teenage girl who's never struggled with the realities of the real world. I've never needed to worry about paying for my school or having a roof over my head, and I've certainly never had to go to bed fearing for my life. But you see, the 2 million Palestinians living in the West Bank and the 1.5 Palestinian refugees are not as fortunate as I am. It breaks my heart to see that my people, my community, are being dehumanized in the sense that millions are being killed or deprived from their basic necessities. And I think to myself, how has society been able to turn a blind eye to the brutal mistreatment of Palestinians during this occupation? How has society been able to belittle the importance of Palestinian human lives to an extent where no one intervenes through the bloodshed and terror of this conflict, and only few who are lucky like me get to lead normal, healthy lives? I wanted to look at this concept of dehumanization on a large scale to understand the situation in the West Bank. And when I did, I realized that it was taking place in all parts of the world. 130,000 Mexicans have been slaughtered in the Mexican drug war, 470,000 Syrians have been killed in the Civil War, and 1,500 Sudanese have been slaughtered in the ongoing turmoil. I'm stating all these numbers, but what do they really mean? Well, they mean that 130,000 Mexicans who look like this, 470,000 Syrians who look like this, and 1,000 and 5,000 Sudanese who look like this. How are the people responsible for these killings able to justify themselves? So many die in the most gruesome ways, and it seems that little or no action is being taken by any world leaders to seek justice and peace for these people, because to some they're viewed as less important. And this dehumanization of people can stretch as far as skin color. Systematic racism has degraded the human value of African Americans in the US to an extent that campaigns seeking justice bluntly need to tell you that Black Lives Matter. About these global issues, I wanted to understand why dehumanization occurred. According to social psychology, people recognize two kinds of social groups: an in-group and an out-group. An in-group is a social group in which people identify themselves to, and the out-group being vice versa. And people can have multiple in-groups according to race, age, nationality, and so on. So for example, my in-groups would be Middle Easterners, 17-year-olds, or if I like to knit, then the girls from my knitting club. These would be the group of people in which I feel I belong to. And the out-group would be everybody else, such as Russian Olympic gymnasts or a bunch of 80-year-olds in Timbuktu. And so dehumanization occurs because our brains tend to view the out-group as less of humans. And this doesn't necessarily motivate people to be cruel, but what it rather does is stimulate a moral indifference in which we recognize that something is terribly wrong, yet we say or do nothing. Subject to this bias for our in-group over our out-group. You see, I never realized how true this was until last week. I went on a school trip to Cambodia. We met our tour guide, and he was such a lovely man. He was very sweet. And we had just arrived after our 12-hour trip from here to Cambodia. And oh, here's the thing, they lost our luggage. They lost our luggage. We're on our way to our hotel, and our tour guide starts talking to us about the Cambodian genocide that ended in the 80s and how his father was killed in it. And I was thinking, oh God, this must be horrible, but I can't really think about this right now. I mean, the airport just lost my luggage, and how soon can I get deodorant? Because I'm sure I smell disgusting. And so you see, I sympathized with this man, but I didn't really feel any form of deep pain for him. But as the days went on, I started to feel this sense of guilt as I temporarily integrated into the Cambodian community. On our third day, our tour guide took us to a killings field where thousands of Cambodians were slaughtered in the Cambodian genocide. And as he was talking about the history, you could hear the pain in his voice and see the tears in his eyes. And in that moment, I knew that what he was feeling is exactly what I feel towards the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Later that day, he took us to a prison where they kept victims in the genocide, and we actually got to meet one of the victims. As he was sharing his story, I felt my heart drop as he was sharing these awful memories and details. And so, you see, my reaction to the Cambodian genocide was much different than it was in the beginning of the trip. I built this empathy through learning something new about this nation, and in the end, I didn't look at their pain as any less than the pain of my people who suffer back home. Not everyone is able to travel halfway across the world to empathize with a different nation, and not everyone has to. We're also concerned for looking out for our in-group that we tend to forget that the out-group are people too. But if we all tried a little harder to educate ourselves about these different parts of the world, then there will start to become this mentality in which we identify with everyone. Reading a book or an article or just simply watching a documentary can go a long way. Despite having different skin colors, different gods, and different traditions, there will always be commonalities between us, and if we just took the time to discover them, then I can assure you our abilities to empathize will stretch much further. Ladies and gentlemen, in the end of the day, we're all part of the same in-group, which is being human. Thank you.